Hi, all. So it has just come out that Huda had a restraining order placed against her by Louis' baby mama, basically because she broke into the apartment building, threatened to kill herself, threatened to break down the door and harm both Louis' baby's mother and her child, and swore on her daughter's life that she would do both of these things. Okay. And this, I'm so sorry, comes as a surprise to no one, okay? Typically when I do these things, I work off a script, but guys, this is straight off the cuff, off the cuff, off the top of my head, okay? And that's what you guys are gonna hear. Here is the thing about Huda. I am so sorry. If you watch Love Island season 7 and you have even a cursory knowledge of personality disorders, Huda was always clearly borderline. Now, I am obligated to say allegedly for entertainment purposes only, right? Because of the fact that, I'm not her doctor. I'm not a person who can diagnose her. But I'm so sorry. I've seen enough. In my personal opinion, and I'm not necessarily saying this as a professional, okay? Whatever caveats I need to make, that girl is borderline, okay? Want to know why? Here I have my DSM-5, okay? I want to read you guys some of the criteria for borderline personality disorder. 1, a pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image, and affects, marked impulsivity beginning in early adulthood and presenting in a variety of contexts as indicated by 5 or more of the following. Let's go over this, okay? 1, frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. Ask Jeremiah about this, okay? 2, a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation. Why don't you ask Shelley about that? Ask Shelley about that. Ask Calantria about that. Very interesting. Okay, so we got 2 of the 5 so far. 3, identity disturbance. Marked and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. Why don't you ask her plastic surgeon about that? Okay? Ask her plastic surgeon about that, right? Next, 4, impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging, i.e. spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, binge eating. Do not include suicidal, self-mutilating, or behavioral covered in criteria 5, okay? So, well, with criteria 4, I would need to know her personally in order to give her that one. So I'm going to hold off on that one. 5, recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, or threats, or self-mutilating behavior. Well, I mean, obviously we have criteria 5 in this news story that we're dealing with right now. 6, affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood. Tense, episodic dysphoria, irritability, or anxiety, usually lasting a few hours and only rarely more than a few days. Why don't you ask the entire cast of Love Island what you turned that fucking villa into, okay? 7, chronic feelings of emptiness. I would have to talk to her to know that one, right? But by the way, just so you guys know, we already have 5 criteria, all right? 8, inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger, frequent displays of temper, constant anger, or recurrent physical fights. Wow. Now we have 6 of the 5 criteria needed to diagnose borderline personality disorder. And lastly, 9, transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. I don't know her. I would have to talk to her to know that. Guys, this girl clearly has borderline personality disorder. And here's the thing that really gets me. Love Island goes about when they cast, they do supposedly extensive psychological testing to determine whether or not their cast members are stable enough to be in the villa, which is ultimately a very, very stressful psychological experiment. I feel that in season 5 and in season 6 that they actually adhere to those criteria, right? And they were actually doing it in such a way where they really wanted to test people and see whether or not they would be stable enough to handle the situation. And they got a fairly stable cast, but also had a very interesting cast of characters. What I think happened with season 7 is that they wanted to up the ante. Season 6 was wildly successful. They made a ton of money on it. And I think that Love Island casting people decided, okay, how can we raise the scale of this thing so that it can be even bigger, even better, even more explosive, even more dramatic? And as such, we ended up with personalities like Huda, quite frankly, Sierra, and quite frankly, Ace, okay? Anyway, that is how we ended up with the personalities we ended up there. And the problem with doing this type of casting, where you're purposely casting increasingly unstable people, is that eventually someone is going to end up hurt, dead, or in jail. Okay? That is the path that they are on. Hurt, dead, or in jail. They've had multiple, from this cast, multiple people from this cast clearly have been dealing with probably pretty intense SI, okay? 2, and then multiple people on this cast are clearly psychologically and emotionally unstable. right? And I just think that Love Island, even though I know they're not going to do this because they want the money, and at the end of the day, it's all about them Benjamins, right? They really need to be careful with their casting this next year, okay? They need to overhaul things and avoid casting someone who clearly meets criteria for borderline personality disorder as a cast member, and then basically keeping them in the villa almost forcibly in order to continue the entertainment and for the plot and for the ratings. Yes, they got what they wanted out of this, right? This was the highest rated season they've ever had in Love Island. They had a lot of people watching. It was the talk of the town. But the question that they need to ask themselves is at what cost? At what cost? And at the end of the day, there's only one end point that this path leads down, which is someone dead in jail or severely hurt, okay? Or in the hospital, right? So I think that it was irresponsible of Peacock to cast Huda on that cast in general. I am almost certain, I don't know for a fact that they know, right? But I feel that based on what we've heard about the psychological testing that the cast members go under, that they had at least some awareness of her and may have even casted her for that reason. But at the end of the day, like, Huda has always been this way. This restraining order situation is a surprise to no one. To anyone who had a reasonable view of what this woman was like. It has always been clear that she was a deeply disturbed, deeply psychologically unstable, and clearly personality disordered person. I am so sorry. And I am not one who frequently will just outright say, this is what the diagnosis I think somebody is. No, I usually don't do that. I usually will hedge around it and say, you know, whatever, I'm trying to be responsible. And obviously, I don't know her. I can't definitively diagnose her. Yeah, because I'm trying to remain ethical. But all signs point to BPD. And not only BPD, untreated, unmanaged BPD. Because at the end of the day, borderline personality disorder is actually manageable if you actually go to therapy consistently and do your DBT. Because that is what DBT was developed for, specifically for borderline personality disorder. That's what she needs. She needs probably some EMDR too, some trauma therapy. I understand that a lot of her trauma came from the fact that her dad was physically abusive, according to her, and potentially sexually abusive, according to her. And I understand she's probably been through a lot of really horrible things in her life that have made her the way that she is. I have, at some level, some empathy for this girl, but I do not have empathy for the fact that she refuses to get the help that she clearly and desperately needs, okay? And nothing that is happening is a surprise to me. I did not feel that I needed to think very hard about this in order to come up with my ideas, because this is something that I expected. This is an expected turn of events. This is very expected given the kind of person that Huda has shown herself to be, and nobody should be surprised in any way, shape, or form. And I know that that is controversial, and if the Hood rats want to come bother me, go ahead. I don't really care at this point. You know what I mean? She is what she is. She is what she is. She is what she is. She needs the help. I hope that she gets the help that she needs. And I hope that the restraining order is able to go through and that Louis' baby mama is able to keep herself safe from Huda and her violence, reactivity, and hostility. And I wonder if her and Louis are going to stay together or not. But, you know, at the end of the day, none of that's my fucking business, all right? That lady needs help. She needs help and she needs prayer, okay? But she also, mostly, more than anything, she needs to get off of my fucking feed. How about that? And she has been off my fucking feed until she tried to assault this woman. So, you know, whatever. Anyway, whatever. That's what I got to say. That's my 10 cents. Bye. I'll see you guys next time. Later.